Weak, stupid humans came to our aid, while mighty cowards ignored our screams. The galactic community abandoned us to insectoid hordes until only Earth answered our cries. Paul Howard eased onto the bar stool, ignoring creaks of age from the seat and his body. Eager young human cadets prodded for war stories. He nursed a cheap shot, beginning humanity's most pivotal tale. You kids want to know about the Iridian conflict? Galaxy sure learned not to underestimate us humans then. Advanced aliens called Iridians got attacked by bug monsters called the Swarm. Distress calls begged anyone for help. The Galactic Council, so-called powerful races, talked and decided Iridians should handle it alone with their fancy tech. Too bad that tech failed, as Swarm tore through defenses and colonies. Paul threw back his drink. With the Council doing squat, Iridians turned to Earth in desperation. See, back then humanity was primitive nobodies to the galaxy. We barely reached the stars and couldn't get a foothold. But Iridians offered big rewards for human armies to fight Swarm. Our governments jumped to earn respect on the galactic stage. We sent a fleet, ready to prove humanity's worth, or die trying. The recruits leaned, eyes wide. Paul signaled for another round, knowing he owed them the gritty details. The bitter liquor couldn't wash away haunting memories, or the bitter truth. If humans failed this trial by fire, helpless Iridians and humanity's galactic ambitions would perish under chitinous claws. He steeled himself to relive the brutality that would reforge mankind's destiny in the stars. Paul's eyes hardened as he recounted humanity's first foray onto the galactic battlefield. We dropped into hell when we arrived at Zephyrus Prime. The Iridians were on their last legs, barely holding on as the Swarm tore through their lines. Their plasma cannons scorched the Earth, but the bugs just kept coming, crawling over their dead to reach the colony's walls. He took a swig of his drink, the burn reminding him of the fires that raged across the besieged settlement. Admiral Linux took one look at the chaos and knew the Iridians' tactics were worth jack shit against this enemy. He rallied us, told us to forget everything we thought we knew about warfare. We had to adapt to fight dirty if we wanted to survive. The recruits leaned forward, enraptured by the tale of human grit and ingenuity. Paul's voice grew rougher as he described the brutal close-quarters combat that followed. We got in close, so close we could smell the stench of the Swarm's ichor. Flamethrowers, shotguns, anything that could shred chitin at point-blank range. We fought in the tunnels they'd burrowed, in the ruins of Iridian homes. It was a meat grinder, but we gave as good as we got. He paused, lost in the memories of blood and fire, of comrades lost and victories hard won. The Iridians, they watched us, saw how we refused to back down even when the odds were stacked against us. Something changed in them then, a spark of defiance reigniting in their eyes. They started to fight alongside us, using their tech in ways they never had before. Jury-rigged plasma mines, repurposed construction exoskeletons turned into war machines. We became one force, united against the Swarm. Paul's gaze grew distant, remembering the pivotal moment when the tide began to turn. It was a hell of a thing watching the Iridians evolve their tactics on the fly. Combining our guts and their tech, we started pushing the Swarm back, inch by bloody inch. The battle for Zephyrus Prime had become a crucible, forging a new kind of warfare that the galaxy had never seen before. Paul's face darkened as he recalled the next horrifying development. We thought our joint tactics were turning the tide, Iridians and humans united against those damn bugs. The Swarm was falling back, their assault blunted. Then, a blood-curdling screech from above froze us in our tracks. He slammed a fist on the bar, making the recruits jump. The Behemoth, that's what the Iridians called it. A monster unlike any the galaxy had seen. It towered over the battlefield, its exoskeleton harder than any armor we could muster. The beast's claws rent through steel like it was paper. His voice dropped to a haunted whisper. We threw everything we had at it. Plasma rounds, incendiary shells, laser lances. Nothing even scratched the damned thing. It tore through our lines, scattering humans and Iridians alike. Our hard-won ground, soaked in blood, lost in minutes. The bar fell silent, the recruits enraptured by the grim tale. Paul's eyes were distant, seeing the carnage unfold again. We had no choice. The order came to fall back to the citadel at the heart of the colony, a fortress of last resort. As we fled, The swarm surged forward, the behemoth at the vanguard of their renewed assault. He let out a shuddering breath. High Chancellor Xyloth, the Iridian commander, caught a glancing blow from the behemoth's claws. His armor held, but barely. We dragged him back to the citadel, leaving a trail of blue blood in our wake. With Xyloth down, the chain of command fell apart. Paul's gaze hardened. That's when Admiral Linux stepped up. He rallied us, human and Iridian alike, in that desperate bastion. As the swarm battered at the gates and our numbers dwindled, Linux hatched a plan. A last, daring gambit to take out the behemoth and the heart of the hive. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. A suicide run. A strike team of our best human and Iridian would infiltrate the hive. They'd plant a nuke right under the bug's throne room. Then they'd lure the behemoth back to the hive. A sacrificial play to bury the beast and the swarm's leadership in radioactive fire. The recruits leaned in, hanging on his every word. Paul drew a deep breath. I was chosen for that team. I knew it was a one-way trip, we all did. But it was our only shot. The survival of the colony, maybe the whole damn war, hinged on this desperate ploy. His eyes met each recruit in turn, his gaze haunted but resolute. You wanted to know how humans earned our place among the stars, how we showed the galaxy what we're made of? It was missions like this, moments where we stared into the abyss and didn't flinch, where we bet it all on a sliver of hope. Paul signaled for another round, steeling himself to recount the brutal, harrowing details of that fateful mission, the one that would decide the fate of Zephyrus Prime and shape the course of human destiny in the Iridian conflict. Paul's grip tightened on his glass as he continued, his voice rough with emotion. The behemoth loomed before us, a mountain of chitin and malice. Its eyes burned with a savage intelligence as it fixed its gaze upon our team. He shuddered, the memories still vivid. Zara, our Iridian infiltrator, reacted first. She lunged forward, her plasma blades flashing as she aimed for the creature's joints, seeking any weakness in its armor. The recruits leaned closer, their drinks forgotten as Paul painted the scene. Sergeant Riggs worked feverishly to arm the explosive, his hands steady despite the chaos erupting around him. The rest of us formed a defensive perimeter, our weapons trained on the monstrosity before us. Paul's voice dropped to a whisper. The behemoth moved with a speed belied by its size. It lashed out with its claws, the razor-sharp edges slicing through the air with a sickening hiss. We scattered, barely evading the deadly swipes. He closed his eyes, the sounds of battle echoing in his mind. We poured everything we had into the fight. Plasma rounds, incendiary grenades, even the Iridian sonic disruptors. But the behemoth's hide seemed to absorb the impacts, its advance unslowed. Paul's hand shook as he raised his glass to his lips. Zara danced around the creature, her blades leaving glowing scars across its carapace. But for every wound she inflicted, the behemoth struck back with devastating force. One swipe caught her across the chest, sending her flying into the hive's pulsing walls. He paused, his eyes haunted. I remember the sound of her armor cracking, the sickening crunch of chitin against bone. But still, she struggled to her feet, her eyes blazing with defiance. Paul's voice grew stronger as he recounted the team's desperate stand. We fought with everything we had, knowing that our lives and the fate of the colony hung in the balance. The air grew thick with the stench of blood and burnt chitin as we battled the monstrosity. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Just when it seemed like the behemoth would overwhelm us, Sergeant Riggs let out a triumphant shout. The explosive was armed, its countdown initiated, but in that moment of victory, the behemoth's gaze fell upon him. Paul's voice trembled as he recounted the next harrowing moments. The creature lunged forward, its claws outstretched, seeking to crush the human who dared to threaten its domain. Riggs stood his ground, his eyes narrowed in determination as he faced down the charging monstrosity. The recruits held their breath, their hearts pounding as Paul's story reached its crescendo. Riggs timed his move perfectly. At the last possible second, he dove to the side, the behemoth's claws missing him by mere inches. The creature's momentum carried it forward, directly into the path of the armed explosive. Paul's voice grew hushed. The explosion rocked the hive, the shockwave throwing us from our feet. The behemoth, caught at the epicenter of the blast, let out an unearthly shriek as the flames engulfed it. He paused, his eyes distant. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the flames and the pounding of our hearts. Then, through the smoke and debris, we saw the behemoth, its carapace cracked and smouldering, its eyes dimmed. It swayed, then toppled forward, the ground shaking as it fell. Paul paused, taking a shuddering breath as the memories of that final desperate battle against the behemoth washed over him. The recruits leaned forward, their eyes wide with a mix of horror and fascination as he continued his tale. "We fought like demons possessed, throwing everything we had at that monstrosity," Paul said, his voice rough with emotion. "Plasma grenades, sonic disruptors, even the Iridian's prized neutron lances, but nothing seemed to even scratch its hide." He closed his eyes, the screams of his falling comrades echoing in his mind. Zara was the first to go. She had just darted in, her blades flashing, when the behemoth's claw caught her in a vicious backhand. The sound of her armor cracking, the sight of her broken body hitting the ground. I'll never forget it. Paul's fists clenched as he recounted the others' fates. Jax, Kira, Thorne, they all fell one by one, buying time for Riggs to arm the device. Their blood painted the hive's floor, mingling with the ichor of the swarm. His voice dropped to a whisper. In the end, it was just Riggs and me. The device was armed, ready to blow the behemoth and the hive to kingdom come. But the detonator, it was across the chamber, behind the creature. Paul's eyes snapped open, fixing the recruits with a haunted stare. Riggs looked at me, a sad smile on his face. "It's been an honor, sir," he said, before charging straight at the behemoth, drawing its attention. He swallowed hard, the memory playing out in vivid detail. The behemoth's talons punched through Riggs' armor like it was tissue paper. It lifted him up, impaling him, before tossing his body aside like a discarded rag doll. Paul's voice cracked. But Riggs's sacrifice, it gave me the opening I needed. I lunged for the detonator, slamming my fist down on the trigger. The explosion. It was like the birth of a new sun. He shook his head as if trying to clear the memories. The blast tore through the hive, bringing tons of rock and chitin crashing down. I barely managed to escape, stumbling out of the rubble and into the waiting arms of our reinforcements. Paul sighed, the weight of the tale heavy on his shoulders. The swarm was in disarray, their behemoth destroyed, their hive collapsed. We pushed them back, the Iridians and us, until Zephyrus Prime was finally free. He looked down at his empty glass. The Iridians called us heroes, their saviors, but the cost, it was so damn high. The friends I lost, the part of my soul that died in that hive. I don't think I'll ever truly recover. Paul stood, his gaze distant as he looked out over the bar. That conflict changed everything for humanity. It proved our worth, earned us a place on the galactic stage. But for those of us who were there, who fought and bled and lost, the scars run deep. The memory of our fallen comrades, the weight of what we had to do, it's a burden we'll carry for the rest of our lives. He turned, his eyes meeting each recruit in turn. The Iridian conflict may have ended, but for us the war never truly ends. It lives on in our memories, in our nightmares, a constant reminder of the price we paid and the sacrifices we made. Paul walked away from the table, his steps heavy with the weight of his past. The recruits watched him go, a newfound respect and understanding etched on their faces. They had heard the stories, learned the history, but now they had seen the true face of war, reflected in the haunted eyes of a man who had lived it. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.